Hey everybody, welcome to Love and Relo, the voice of the relocation industry. I am your host, Ben Cross, and I am so excited to be here today. We have an Australian today. I'm so excited. I think this might be our first Australian guest. We're really reaching out here. I mean, she's with us. It's got to be like 5, 6 in the morning. I don't even know. So she's amazing already in my book. I have so much respect for this global mobility professional. We've got Keryn Mendes here from CSIRO. We're going to find out what that all means. It's pretty exciting. I was talking to her in the green room, so really excited to get her perspective. Also, we have her speaking at the IAM conference, actually. So let's go ahead and really quick plug that too. The IAM conference, the 58th annual meeting and expo for IAM is October 21st through the 23rd. You can register at iammeetings.org. I think that actually might be a .com. I don't know. Let's double check that. IAM meetings. Just Google it. You'll find it. Also, if you're a corporate member, you can go for free using promo code SIG20, and you can register free of charge. You're welcome. Anyway, so let's go ahead and without further ado, let's bring out Keryn here. She's been waiting patiently. Let's see here. Keryn, how's it going?
Hi, Ben. How are you? Long time no see.
I know, right? I'm like, Keryn, stay put. I'll be right back. Oh, it's good to see you. Good to see you there. So where in the world exactly? I know you're in Australia, but where in Australia are you?
Sure. I'm in Melbourne, Victoria. So currently the only place in Australia that's under lockdown.
Wow. So you guys are being very cautious out there and playing it safe. Have you noticed with the added precautions that Melbourne has seen significantly less COVID-19 activity, or what do you?
Yeah, I mean, it got to a stage where it was ramping up. We were up to about 700 cases a day, I know, which probably doesn't sound like a great deal compared to the rest of the world, but it was slowly getting out of control. And the state government, because we have a federal level government and the state government who was in charge, I guess, of the measures that are in place, and the state government measures in place, some that were pretty controversial. There was a nighttime curfew. You can leave your house between 8 o'clock in the evening till 5 a.m. the next morning. You have to wear face masks out wherever you go is mandatory. And there are a couple of other things. You can't travel outside of your home radius of more than 5 kilometres, which I think is about 3 miles. And you still can't do that now. So it did work, though. We're down to about 9 cases a day now.
In the entire country? 9 cases a day in the entire
country? No, that's just Victoria.
Oh, okay.
So,
Victoria.
Yeah, and then the state borders were then all closed as well. So we can't travel to any other state. So it's pretty crazy.
Now, what's going on with travel bans? Is there also a travel ban in Australia?
Yes. Yeah, you can't leave or come into without permission from the Australian government. Yeah.
Okay. Are there exceptions being made for any certain types of, are transferees or assignees at all getting any kinds of exceptions? Or
they are. It needs to be for, I think there's a handful of reasons on the Department of Immigration's website, but effectively the core reasons need to be it's either COVID related, so you're either coming in to help with the COVID situation. It has to be for the national interest. So again, and I'll explain a little bit later, but because I work in the science sector, that's always a big ticket for national interest and national benefit. And then there's big component is compassionate grounds. I'd say that's probably the majority of the requests that the department are getting about people who have been displaced, people who have been separated from their families. It's a really big component of it. And it's really sad to see actually a lot of people have been, and I don't know this is across the whole world, but we're even seeing requests come through from individuals being a government science agency who are requesting the support of CSIRO to validate some of their science work on compassionate grounds to let them come back in and support them in their request to get exemptions. So it's really sad.
That is sad. I mean, it's really put a lot of strain on everybody. You mentioned a couple of things here I want to touch on. Before we get too far down the road, let's go ahead and just tell people, what is CSIRO,
Sure.
And just help people who maybe aren't familiar with the name of your agency.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So I guess domestically it's probably more renowned than internationally, although that is changing. So CSIRO is effectively the Australian Government Science Agency. And its main mantra is to accelerate science and innovation for the national benefit, so for Australia's benefit. Probably about 5 years ago, it decided to expand those wings a little bit in the fact that they developed a global growth strategy. My role was born out of that. And they look to place people out there in the world for the sole purpose of collaborating, strengthening those relationships globally around science and innovation, benefiting those countries, but also benefiting Australia in that development around science and innovation.
Awesome. Fantastic. So we've got a bunch of people coming in right now on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook. So this is great. If you're watching right now, go ahead and, give Keryn a like there, or throw a heart out there, let us know you're out there. Throw some comments, as well. Love to read those comments. Let's see who's checking in so far here. All right. We got a bunch of folks coming in here. Sandra Clary sent us the link. Okay. IAMmeetings.com. Appreciate you, Sandra, there. EDC, the title sponsor. Shout out to EDC. Fernando, hello all. A great lineup ahead from Brazil there. What's up, Fernando? It's good to see you as well. Thank you. Yeah, we do have a spectacular lineup. We got 2 folks representing APAC, which is great. We got Asia and Australia represented. We've got Africa represented this week, so pretty thrilled. Michael Quigley, hey, Ben and Keryn, here and ready to learn from the masters. Orange is a power color, Benny. Orange. Mike, I don't even know what to say to you, Mike. Okay. I love you, man.
I love it.
Look at that. It's great. Orange, Fernando with orange. Actually, this is salmon. Okay. Can I just clarify one moment here? We got some weird lighting in here, but this is actually salmon, also known as Michael Quigley's skin tone. Let's see here. Just kidding, Quigs. I love you, bro. Tim Rambo, hello, Keryn and Ben. Good to see you, Tim. Thank you. Fernando, yep, for everybody's got jokes. That's cool. All right. William, hello, Ben and Keryn. Greetings from DMS Moving Systems. Hey, William, it's good to see you. Thomas Bailey, hello, Keryn and Ben. I actually had lunch with Thomas. I think he's putting a photo of me in a compromised eating position on the internet momentarily. Thank you, Thomas, for that. Janaina, happy Monday, everyone. Loving Relo from Rio. What's up, Janaina? Good to see you out there in Rio. Sandra Clary, what an exciting organization. I'm looking forward to beefing up my CSIRO knowledge today. Excellent. Yeah, salmon. Exactly. Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate it. At least somebody's straight out there. Okay, cool. So we were talking a little bit about CSIRO. We were talking a little bit about COVID. Mm-hmm. What has been the impact of COVID-19 to you specifically in your program, maybe, but also just to global mobility in the region, would you say?
Sure. Well, I think COVID in the region, there is a slight nuance, although I think it's probably the same across most of the world. For me, primarily, COVID, like probably everybody else on this call, was sent into a bit of a spin. Although the interesting thing with COVID was there was a small window of time where we kind of had the opportunity to get in front of it from I guess a policy and compliance and governance perspective. You might recall, I think we picked up on it at CSIRO in the early media in about mid-January, which we quickly formed like a situation management team. We put together, and one of the first things that we did was to look at where our travel program and our business travelers were in the world and put out some alerts to them, make sure that they were aware what was going on, and suggest that they come home. For me, my primary focus is always my expats. I'm responsible when they're on my watch. I take it quite seriously, and I wanted to make sure that they were aware as well and that they were safe. Thankfully, we didn't have anybody specifically in China that we knew of from an expat point of view. We did have some business travelers. And so it was around getting that kind of message out. But for me, I kind of had one eye on that, but then I also had another eye on, well, if this spreads, what's going to happen? And so I quickly went to work in developing what I call an extraction plan. And so the organisation hadn't had one of those before because CSIRO is only relatively new into the global space. It was always been a kind of a domestic organisation within Australia. And so The program, although it hasn't a large amount of expats, it did have a fairly wide reach. We had people in some really important roles based in embassies.
I was going to ask where in the world. So just kind of give some context there. Where in the world were people?
Yeah, sure. So we had some people in the US. We had people in Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, and we have some people in Montpellier in France as well. But so that's just expats. So from a business travel perspective, we have people everywhere, and we have a really large footprint when it comes to business travel, given the remit around collaboration in science and innovation. And so I had to pull together that extraction plan quite quickly. Thankfully, I did, because I think about 2 weeks after I had it published and up, we went into work. We were pulling people out of those locations, and I think up until most recently, my most recent one that I've actually pulled them out of Seattle most recently. So yeah, it was an interesting time. And I'm really glad that I did that from the perspective of being prepared, but also around giving the expats some comfort around they knew what was going to happen. They knew what support they were going to get when they were pulled out of country. Obviously, they went into remote working from whatever part of the world that they came from back into Australia, and so that meant some pretty tricky time zones they had to manage. But one of the interesting things was, when I wrote the extraction plan, I don't think anybody back then, which was probably late Feb, I don't think anybody anticipated it would go on this long. And so we designed it to be a 3-month, 6-month plan, which quickly then, as you would have seen as well, it evolved quite quickly into being a longer term plan. And so I had to develop phase 2 of that plan, what that looked like, the sustainability of people working offshore, the ongoing nature of their allowances, which are often all host-based.
How did those plans, how did phase 1 differ from phase 2? I mean, what were some of those changes when you realized, okay, this isn't going away, this is just getting worse?
Mm-hmm.
This is obviously going to be the new normal, at least until a vaccine.
Yeah.
So when and how did plan 2 change, or phase 2 change?
Yeah. So phase 1 was all around kind of maintaining the status quo from an assignment provision point of view. We didn't want to impact them too much. For those that we had pulled out of country, we wanted to make sure that there wasn't impact. They'd obviously left in a pretty big hurry. They still had their housing. We were still supporting that. We were still supporting some schooling. People were helping them make the decision around maintaining schooling in the host location but remotely for their child versus enrolling them locally. We had to also take into consideration that Australia had started to ramp up at that stage, and so the conditions from a schooling point of view weren't necessarily any better in Australia than they were in that host location. And so we were basically maintaining the status quo. Then phase 2 was all about kind of tapering that back. We needed to start to think about the longevity, the spend of the business associated with supporting that, and what made sense from a policy perspective, what was host related and what was home related allowances. And so we had to taper back some of those host related allowances, so cost of living, things that weren't necessarily being impacted by anymore, but still maintaining those host obligations, so housing, for example, or schooling. So we wanted to make sure that the individual was remaining as whole as they could from a financial point of view, but also that they were still supported from a health and wellbeing and a mental health perspective as well, because, working different time zones and just being displaced generally was quite a big impact on those individuals. And we still have people kind of holding out in some host locations where the conditions weren't so bad. Like I said, we only just brought someone back from Seattle in the US in the last couple of months. They kind of rode out about a good 6 months of it, and then they just got to a point where they thought it probably wasn't in the best interests of them and their families, so they came back.
Yeah, that's I'll give you a water break there too, because I appreciate that. I appreciate that really that great insight there and telling that story. We got a couple people here checking in. Want to hear your questions and comments for Keryn as well. Love to hear those questions. I'd love to ask. I love when they get involved and the audience starts asking great questions here. Brian Rivers checking in from First Tech Federal Credit Union. Hey Brian, good to see you. Tim Quirk checking in from Western New York. There you go. Annette Walters from North Texas checking in. Hey, Annette, good to see you. Annette's going to be on the program tomorrow, so make sure you tune in for that. Jamie Masser, hi, Ben and Keryn. Cheers from sunny Mississippi. Awesome, Jamie. So now taking a look forward, right? Mm-hmm. Let's look towards the future. What does global mobility's role look like in the future?
It's a good question, Ben. I think in my mind, it's kind of two steps to it. There's the immediate term, and I think to some degree, some people are still kind of finding their feet quite rightly because COVID's kind of taken its speed at different rates across different parts of the world. But I think in the immediate term, in my mind, it's still quite reactionary. I think, well, obviously with border restrictions and movement restrictions, we'll see the decline of some traditional mobility approaches. So your long and short terms, obviously your business travel's going to take a hit as well. And I think in the flip side of that, because there is still a demand for talent, I think we're going to see a rise in the global workforce with remote arrangements being put in place. Which makes it tricky. So for those organisations that don't have a global footprint, and CSIRO is one of those, it raises some really interesting questions around how do we go global without, breaching any compliance rules, whether that be tax, immigration, and how we remain compliant. So, there's obviously lots of ways to do that. I think what that'll mean more longer term is that we'll need to be a lot more strategic. And so we were already kind of shifting quite gradually, but a closer alignment to the talent team. I think we'll probably see ourselves more heavily either partnering or embedded within the global talent teams. And we'll look to have I guess what you call a hybrid approach, almost like an a la carte menu for the business around kind of providing them with some options. I think the traditional mobility offerings will still be there, so the short and long-term assignments, because there are some organisations which still very much need boots on the ground, and science sector is very much one of those. You can't do lab experiments remotely. So that will still be there, but I think a lot of organisations will start to look to complement that with some alternatives. So I guess I've been kind of coining it as the rise of the global workforce, Ben.
So are you suggesting like an alternative policy type, mm-hmm. Or another policy or another type of assignment? I mean, what might that look like?
Yeah. I guess in practical terms, yes, it would be a different policy type. I think you'd need to look external to collaborate probably with some vendors. So your global employee companies or setting up entities offshore. It really depends on the complexity and the nature of the business and whether that's possible. And then CSIRO is a little bit unique in the fact that because we already had an established strong collaboration thread, we may look to potentially second people into different parts of the organisations around the world, just so we can get that reach, but also maintain that connection back to CSIRO. Again, there are compliance aspects to that. That's not for free. So just making sure that the options are on the table for the organisation, and you're really clear when communicating that what the boundaries are around that. So how long, what can you do, and what that means from a cost and administration point of view to the business.
So you bring up the point of boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. and communication and being clear with people. And that was part of your COVID strategy. And I think it's brilliant. And you were obviously very, ahead of it. And I think that's great. And I think people seek that kind of clarity and that kind of communication, especially in times of crisis. But in a time of ambiguity such as this that we live in now, how does the organization balance the need for communication, for obviously to remain compliant, with the ever-changing, evolving, fluid nature of the requirements of the business? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
HR is requiring compliance and to remain compliant, and to standardize kind of policies to put boundaries and parameters around things for obvious reasons. But then the business is requiring a lot of fluidity, and even the talent is requiring or requesting, or demanding in some cases, also to be heard and to be accommodated. So how do you balance all those constituencies?
Yeah, sure. I mean, other than cloning yourself a million times over.
In the distant future, this will be an option.
Or for those who are lucky enough to have a big team. Look, you're absolutely right. It needs to be agile. It needs to be scalable. And I think part of that will come out of that immediate term, rescoping of a lot of mobility programs. So for us at the moment, we're still very much in the immediate term while kind of quietly working in the background around the strategic. So we're very much still trying to put people on the right placement types. There's a lot of displaced people out there, as I'm sure it is across the world. And so we're looking at the options that are still available for us. And I think that once organisations have an opportunity to investigate and outline what that looks like for their business, and that may be different across each of the sectors of their business as well, what might be good for their enterprise services. So their more corporate functions may not necessarily be appropriate for their more revenue generated sectors of the business. And so when they establish what the appropriate measures are, and that's why I speak about, I've got a 6-year-old visiting me.
Hey there, how's she doing there? Is it almost school time?
No, just woke up.
Oh, sweetie, that's so cute. Oh, that's nice. I'm going to give a couple of shout outs here. Jack Jampel checking in here. Hi, Ben and Keryn. Hey, Jack, love to hear your questions there. Sylvia Rivas checking in. Great questions, Ben. Thank you, Sylvia. I appreciate you from Colombia there. Go ahead and leave a question there as well for Keryn. Rory Ramirez checking in here. I should probably play these actually when I do that, so people actually know I'm not just making up these people. There's Jack. Jack's going to be on Thursday as well, so check in for Jack Jampel. It's always a good watch. Sylvia in Colombia checking in. Rory from Chicago. What's up, Rory? Good to see you there. Amanda Rakowski, hi from sunny Phoenix and NEI Global Relocation. Hi, Amanda. Love to hear your questions. Let's see, Hosea Botley. Hello, Keryn and Ben from Phoenix. Hosea, what you doing in Phoenix, man? Look at you. I need some more answers on this stuff. Amanda says, some of my favorite moments of working from home. So sweet. That's a great point. We're going to take this little segue here, this little sidebar, right? Because I worked from home 3 months in the pandemic. I'm back in the office here, but I love those moments. I love watching my kids come down the stairs and seeing them in their jammies and giving them a hug and taking a lunch and just having some moments with them, or whatever. And they'd pop in sometimes on my streams or whatever. And it was hard for me to go back into the office. How is this taste of work from home? Everybody's getting a taste of work from home. Before, it used to be kind of a select benefit, or certain types of people would get it and other types of people wouldn't be afforded the opportunity. But I feel like we've all had a taste of work from home now. And I tell you what, I talk to people in all different sectors, in mobility, a lot not in mobility, and they say, gosh, if I'm asked to go back in the office, I'm going to tell them to look for somebody else. And the talent is getting real demanding right now about this balance that they want. They want to be able to give their kids some snuggles and be more at home. How is this going to, what type of long-term impact are we going to see from this? as
Yeah,
far
I
as
mean,
mobility goes.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, you've summarized it quite nicely, and that was obviously literally an example, completely unscripted, by the way. She's never usually up this early.
Cue the girl. Cue the girl.
Her bedroom's literally right next door, so she's probably like, "Oh, Mum's stalking again." Surprise you. We'll probably get a visit from the other one in a minute too. Just heads up. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, I think it's going to make it hard for people now that they've had a taste of it, and I think the other part of that as well is the fact that working virtually, the platforms like this, like WebEx or Zoom or anything like that, the fact that they've all been so successful in kind of supporting the infrastructures now getting upgraded from a technology point of view at the back end, certainly in Australia anyway. So the fact now that it's been proved to be so successful, I think it's going to make it hard for a lot of organisations to motivate individuals, whether it be business travel or whether it be relocating, and then you overlay that on top of the health concerns. I think you're going to see a real reluctance for people to move, and I think that's going to mean that again, organisations are going to have to think a little bit more laterally around how they attract and retain talent. I think they're going to need to offer a wider variety of employment options. So again, whether that's employing people where they are as opposed to bringing them to the hub. Again, that obviously where the organisation doesn't have a footprint, that brings up a lot of challenges from the organisation's point of view. But if there's a real skill shortage in a particular spot in the world where they can leverage and tap into that talent, then it may be in the organisation's best interest to invest and tap into that and leverage and set up those people locally. So I think they're going to have to look at that. They obviously need to make sure that the infrastructures there are supportive of their culture from an organisation point of view. And so while working from home may work for most people, one of the things, Ben, that I've heard from a lot of people is they're dying to get back into the office. So I'm sure they're very envious of you and your orange shirt.
Salmon.
Salmon, sorry.
I look like a pumpkin. I just realized I look like a pumpkin. Anyway, go ahead. Yes.
and collaborating with bigger people and having conversations with adults. And so organisations need to make sure that their culture, their organisational culture is reflected in whatever location that is. And so, again, they may look to set that up themselves. They may look to partners, the kind of remote offices such as the WeWorks, for example, of the world. They may look to collaborate with partners like that. But they're going to need to really leverage and strengthen their EVP. They're going to have to more actively advertise globally and kind of truly fight for that talent. And they're going to also need to, on the flip side of that, look at their local talent, the ones that they have, and perhaps look at upskilling and doing maybe knowledge transfer virtually and then upskilling locally as opposed to relocating people. So it's going to be tricky.
So this leads me to another concept that people are kicking around quite a bit, mostly in private, because most people don't want to say it out loud. But is the traditional global mobility model dead? Is it dead? I mean, I know it's a morbid thought, but I mean, what do you think?
No, I mean, look, I'm a big one for the blunt question, so thanks for asking, Ben. I think the short answer is no. I think it's going to just probably like the way COVID kind of crept in. I think the changes across mobility, the programs and models and the policies that we offer are also going to evolve quite slowly. Again, the border restrictions around the world have obviously put a physical halt to some of those more traditional short and long-term assignments. However, where, as I said, there are organisations where they do need people on the ground, whether it be business development for closing deals, or whether it be for those more, I guess you could say, blue collar workers, for example, where they physically need to to do some work on the ground, no, there will still absolutely be a need for that. And so the global mobility practitioners are probably going to have to roll up their sleeves a lot more in the shorter interim. I'll give you an example, Ben. We had CSIRO has a deep space program within it. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Dish. It's an Australian movie. You got to go watch it after this. Anyway, it's like from the 80s or the 90s, but take you back in time. But so some of the satellites that from our site at Tibbinbilla are in that movie, and so there is some satellites based there. That's in the ACT, so Canberra, the capital of Australia. There are some satellites there that are actually responsible, and some antennas there as well that are responsible for kind of the navigation of Voyager 2. So we actually worked with NASA quite recently around helping them get those boots on the ground to do some maintenance and repairs to the antennas, which effectively, kind of kept Voyager 2 in the sky and kept it going. So there's some stuff that, although there are restrictions in place, you really can't. You can't do it virtually. Those people really need to be on the ground, and it kind of comes back to that kind of core criteria around those exemption requests for whether they're either compassionate, national benefit, or COVID related. They're really key to having those people on the ground. And the mobility practitioners, although traditionally that's probably something I wouldn't have got involved in because it was more of a business trip related activity, and our business programs handled by another part of the business. I was fully involved with that as far as collaborating with the Department of Immigration and our external immigration agents to make sure that we built a business case around that to break down what the need was and why that was vital, effectively stopping something falling out of the sky. So, yeah, it's pretty cool to be involved with some of that sort of stuff and get back to the grassroots of why you got into mobility in the first place. I love being reminded of that. It's great to operate at that more strategic level and guide the business in the direction it needs to go for its growth strategy. But I got to say, I love rolling up my sleeves and getting involved in stuff like that. It's really, really meaningful.
Yeah, I think it always makes you appreciate your job more when you get a chance to see exactly how what you do applies to the end customer, right? So we got some great comments coming in here. People checking in. Lynn Greenberg from Pivot. What's up, Lynn? Maria from Interar Group Immigration Services in Argentina. What's up, Maria? I love our global audience here. Annette says, how has remote work and the pandemic impacted productivity and loyalty?
Good question.
Yeah.
I think.
You want to take a stab at it?
Yeah. I'll jump in by all means. I think to the surprise of a lot of leaders, I think the productivity around virtual remote working has held, if not increased. I think a lot of leaders are probably skeptical about that. But I think certainly from the lens over here in Australia and I won't comment APAC wise, but I'm sure it's similar. It's absolutely excelled people's expectations. From a loyalty point of view, I think, again, it depends on how the organisations have reacted. Our organisation has been very supportive around, Ben, I was talking to you off camera before around us in Melbourne being the only part in Australia that's still in lockdown. Our kids have probably been homeschooled 3/4 of this year. And so I worked full time. My husband works full time. Wow. We've got our preppy that just did an intro before. And so she's, learning to read, to write, all the fundamentals that, you kind of thought somebody else would do. No, that was you. So yeah, the loyalty back to the organization around supporting and giving you the time that you need to do that has been really well received within my organisation. Certainly, they've also made sure that health and safety not just mental, but physical as well, as being front of mind for the organisation. We recently received a bunch of hardware, so not only tech support, but also physical desks and chairs, the one I'm sitting on right now, ergonomic, to make sure that, you know, the clear sustainability of this pandemic and the ways of working are supported. And I think what will then happen is a lot of organisations here in Melbourne, especially in the city, or as you guys call downtown, have probably seen a reluctance to go back to the office, especially the high rises. I think they did a study where they looked at and found that it would probably take all day to get everybody back into a high rise building through the lifts. And so that dual working will continue. So having really good setups will drive that loyalty around having the option to stay at home or go into the office. And I think that will become what people will look for when they look for jobs moving forward.
I would agree. I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing too. I mean, you know, it's about creating loyalty, but also asking people to come back into the office when they don't feel safe, or where they've kind of rebonded with their family, almost might create a disloyalty or a disengagement event, you know, for that employee. Let's see. Henri says, "Hello, good people." Hello, Henri. Jack, I love what Jack gives me, a wordy question. Jack's going to be on Thursday, so if you love this question, tune in Thursday. Jack says, would you agree that before companies go all out on work from home, managers need to be trained on how to go about doing so? For example, when employees in the office and a manager can't find them, they just think they went to the restroom or they're at lunch. However, when work from home employees doesn't respond back right away to an email, the manager more likely to think they're out goofing off and out somewhere. Just a point that training will be needed.
Yeah, Ben, I think probably for some organizations, some management training around how to navigate this new world will definitely be required. I think there's lots of different leaders out there. Some inherently lead and manage quite hands-off. Some are a little bit more of a closer touch. Can I call that? I don't know. That sounds inappropriate, but I guess So I guess setting those boundaries and making them quite transparent and having them consistent across your whole organization, I think is really important. Everybody's going to really need to recalibrate their culture, their mission, their vision.
Right. I was going to say the culture. They're going to almost have to create a new culture around how do we
employee value proposition.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, and then of course with technology, are they employing some sort of a technology that allows you to kind of pop in on people? Kind of like you would next to a cubicle. You kind of go and say, hey, hey, Sally, how's it going today? Can we talk about this meeting or whatever coming up? And how do you do like a virtual pop-in like that?
Collaboration technology is going to be really important because, I mean, I've even noticed myself, I'm probably talking to people less than you would kind of around the whole coffee, water cooler situation. And so you need to be quite disciplined around scheduling those catch-ups. And so, managers will need to make sure that they have those regular catch-ups scheduled in, but also they're going to need to make sure that they're really clear around what their boundaries are. They're going to need to trust a hell of a lot more, I think. And it's a really good question that's been raised. Thank you.
Jack has another comment here. Jack, if you could phrase these comments in the form of a question, it would make my job a lot easier. Jack says, I believe that I love Jack so much. Jack says, I believe that most companies have not been measuring productivity in the midst of trying to get back to normal. Many companies are nowhere close to back to normal.
Yeah, that's a fair comment. I think, and I had to sound a bit cliche, but what is normal? I think organizations are still determining on what that productivity looks like. I mean, some industries will be impacted more than others. Obviously, like the aviation industry, for example, and the people still working in that industry, obviously the productivity has declined rapidly. And certainly within Australia, the kind of hospitality industry has taken a massive hit. And so the productivity around those will be reflective to some degree of the measures that are in place. But I think until we reach some sort of stability as either a state or a nation, depending on where you're impacted, then yeah, we won't be able to take a beat and recalibrate that and understand what that looks like.
Last comment on this before we pivot out of it. Henri says, I wonder how privacy rights and company needs are going to balance out. And that scenario that we just described before, where you do a pop-in on somebody, I think Skype has this because I know my boss says, but you still have to answer it. They can't just like appear and, you know, like see you and you see them. And I mean, that's kind of a departure from today. I mean, we don't think of our camera and our computer like just deciding to turn on and view us and broadcast to us without us initiating it. How does a company balance those, to his point, privacy rights and company needs?
Yeah, I think the big thing is around setting the culture and the expectation around collaboration. I think that, some organizations in my mind either have this inherently prior to COVID and do it really well. And so pivoting from a face-to-face collaboration to a technology one is second nature. I think some will struggle where they really relied on that kind of older school sitting around a table getting things done. And so certainly technology can help with that, but I think it needs to almost be a change management program that's put in place, and I think almost like a pulse survey or a beat needs to be taken on the organisation to see how everybody is really faring, not only from a mental health perspective, but also from a cultural fit perspective. What may have worked for Keryn before may not necessarily work for her now because the environment has completely changed. So yeah.
I said we're going to get off this topic, and then people keep coming with questions and comments. I'm going to cater to the audience here. If you guys want to stay on this, keep asking questions and comments about it. Sandra says, I think that in the remote working environment, it is bringing more of an outcome focus rather than a task focus in managing good team members. I like that. That's interesting. Measuring more to the output than the input, if you will.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of employees would say that's how they should have been led before. So now it's focusing on the output rather than the input and the clock. Clock watching goes both ways, by the way. I wanted to tell everybody out there who might be a manager or an employee. It's like, we talk about clock watchers, like our employees who just wait for 5 o'clock so they can get out of there. But that's also typically because they have a boss who also does the same thing and says, hey, you weren't here at 9 a.m. or you took a 31-minute lunch or something like that. And then it trains the employee to think the same way.
Yeah.
So, just saying. We have a question here from our friend John Zilka, and also fellow speaker at the IEM conference. We've had a bunch of people tuning in here. John Zilka, who is the president of NRI Relocation, kind of takes off on this question about, is the mobility model dead? And he answers a question, is the RMC model dead? No, RMC centralization, efficiency, customer service support will be in demand for a long time. Google search CRP, not there yet. John, I'd love to hear more thoughts on this, but let me ask this question of you that John poses, or as twist here, is the RMC model dead? In your, what do you think about that? Or do RMCs, are they still providing important services?
Yeah, look, I think absolutely. I mean, if I think about some of the recent activities that I've done for my organisation, absolutely they've been vital in helping us navigate some really tricky times. For example, when the pandemic first started and we had people who were specifically, they were still hanging out in the country that they were at. They had children, the schools were shut. And so, they were trying to manage working full-time. We had some single parents who were working full-time. They had their children at home. They didn't have the capacity to kind of go out and find some of that support around, whether it be extra tutorial or nanny services or education services. But, they're the kind of the boots on the ground and the feelers that you need in order to kind of execute on some of those more unique requests. So there's definitely still a place for them as far as being on the ground and helping us do that. I can think of another example as well, pulling somebody out of, I think it was Washington, at the height of the pandemic, making certain flight times which were quite restricted, but also getting them out of there at the right time and exiting their property. They weren't able to do closing inspections, making sure that the security deposit was returned. They're all the things that the RMC can kind of step in and act as a proxy for you to do. So there's absolutely still a need for them. I think in the short-term interim, the logistical moves around, say, personal goods, for example, might drop off a little bit just while people take that beat and get more comfortable with the what they're calling COVID normal, until people start to want to move around again, I think, and that hesitation towards the health impacts or the exposure to the health impacts, I think that may take a little bit of a hit, but I think there's absolutely still a place and a time for RMC.
Awesome. Well, John will be happy to hear that. Let's see. So here I am. I sit in the U.S. and people have accused me of being too U.S. centric, and so I'm broadening my perspective here. And whenever I have people from other regions and other countries, I always like to ask them to draw some comparisons and help me understand how global mobility and relocation are different, maybe in, let's say, Australia or the Asia Pacific region. How would you compare the two? How is mobility different, maybe in Australia, let's say, than the United States?
Sure. I think I would probably draw on my experience of when I met you, Ben, in Atlanta at the Americas ERC conference. One of the biggest things that stood out to me in the sessions that I was going to, in some of the support vendors that were there, that I was talking to, that there was a really big focus on the domestic market in the US, and especially around relocations and the housing market. I was really surprised to talk to some organisations who had houses on their books, who provided housing options as part of their either attraction or assignment packages. And so that's a really big contrast from anything that I've known in working in APAC and Australia, in the fact that the domestic market within Australia is actually, I'm not going to say it's small, but it plays a smaller role in a global mobility practitioner's day-to-day job. It's often more outsourced to the RMCs of the world to manage, because there are less of those compliance aspects associated with it. There aren't any differences when you move from state to state from a legislative point of view. In saying that, though, now with COVID, of course, a lot of complexities have come in around that. There's border restrictions from one state to the next within Australia, and so you can't just simply move anymore. You need to get all sorts of permissions. They're not necessarily legislative, tax or immigration differences, but they are legislative differences that you've got to navigate. And so global mobility practitioners domestically within Australia need to get involved with things that they haven't had to before, thanks to COVID. And so with the varying rates of infections across the country domestically, I don't see that changing anytime soon. There is a push to move back to more of a federation or a one country approach, but at the moment the the state leaders have the discretion to put in restrictions where and the measures that they see fit at that time. And so domestically moving people is, it's from a housing perspective as well, which is one of the big things that stuck out to me when I was in Atlanta. Organisations may need to go back to looking at that in Australia. I guess probably 20 years ago it was a big component of packages, but not so much now.
So I want to play a quick little game. I want to play a game.
Sure. Okay.
So I'm going to throw out a common a common relocation benefit in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to tell me if this is also a common relocation benefit in Australia. Okay.
Sure.
All right. And then also, and also feel free to chime in the comments too if you have ones that I'm going to miss or forget or whatever, or that you want to hear about. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm a mover. Domestic household goods moving. Somebody's moving from Perth to Melbourne. You covered that? Okay, great.
Yes.
International household goods moving.
Yes.
Okay, great. I say great because I have a vested interest in it. Great. We did something similar in Brazil, and I was very depressed. I was like, oh man, nobody's moving anybody. Okay.
Don't expand in Brazil. Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. And so okay, great. Home sale, home purchase assistance.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Okay. Where they pay realtor fees and things like that. Okay.
Unless you've got a DeLorean, you want to go back 20 years? No.
Never go back to 2020. All right. And then, okay. Another question along the same lines then. Mortgage assistance. Do they offer mortgage or anything? Okay. Not anymore. Okay. Got it. What about temp housing, corporate housing?
Yes.
So if you move somewhere, you maybe get 60 days or something as you're finding a place? 30 days. Okay. That one's on the chopping block. I can tell already. Okay. All right. So you're like,
I think that's the only thing that's left.
That's the only thing that's left. 30 days in a furnished apartment. Okay, great.
Correct.
What about tax equalization?
Yes. Yes, okay. Internationally, not domestically. Yes.
Not domestically. Cost of living adjustments, I'm assuming as well.
Internationally, not domestically.
Okay, not domestically. Okay. So what about how about miscellaneous expense allowances?
Yes. Historically, it's been in some organisations it's been receipt based, so reimbursement spend, potentially with a cap. Sometimes it's been itemised, but organisations are moving to a one-size-fits-all lump sum. And so a lot of that's got to do with the FBT. So I don't think you guys have the FBT. So that's fringe benefit tax. So it's a tax in Australia where the organisation basically gets charged double whatever they give to the individual in taxes.
Wow. Okay. So it almost disincentivizes lump sums.
Yeah. So you have to get really creative in a legal way around packaging up what you provide to make sure that you're being as tax optimized as possible. Because in Australia, you either pay income tax or you pay FBT. But either way, pretty much all of the provisions that you would get from an expat point of view falls under one of those buckets. And you always want to structure it in a way that you make it subject to income tax, because that's, 30-40%, whereas FBT is like 100%.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's huge.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. What about auto shipping, auto relocation? Cars.
Yeah, not internationally, not anymore. I think when I first started out about 14 years ago, that was still happening. Not so much anymore. Even domestically, it's not as common as it used to be. It used to be a bit of a blanket rule domestically. Now it's been kind of buttoned down to one car because we were getting the two cars, the boat, the caravan, and the trailer.
Yep. I've had those people too.
How about pets, Ben? What's the rule of pets?
We relocate pets somewhat. That's a case by not case by case, but company by company policy decision. Typically, I mean, we're talking about shipping animals overseas. I mean, because normally if they're going domestically, they can go in, on a plane or whatever. It's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
But typically it's case by case, I would say. What about you in Australia?
Well, the big thing emerging here is support animals.
Oh yeah,
So,
sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, which vary in definition and in type of pet. They're not always a dog, for example.
Tiny horse. Yeah. It's a thing.
I've moved a horse before in the middle of an equine lockdown, so it's pretty tough.
An equine lockdown? You guys are locking everybody down in Melbourne. Everybody's locked. That's like
we can't do much. I'm telling you. I don't want to get political.
This is great. All right, wonderful. Let me think. How about spousal partner assistance, helping them find jobs at a destination, counseling?
Look, it's interesting one. Again, it was probably historically more something that was provided for, although I feel like it's having a comeback because dual households are probably more common these days. But look, it varies. It's either packaged up in some sort of support mechanism. So whether it's with help with the resume or subscription based or study allowances. Often what happens too is it gets built in is a percentage of their base salary is built into the package to offset that loss of second income, although that's often 5-10%. It's not a huge amount. It certainly wouldn't offset many second incomes.
What about house hunting trips?
Yes, that's still very much, And look, personally, give a plug out to all the companies that do it. It's something I'm a big advocate for. I think if you want your individual who is relocating, whether they have a family or not, if you want them to hit the ground running and be productive, then that is the best thing you can do to get them focused back on their role.
Yeah. International schools for their kids?
Yes, to some degree, although it needs to be like for like. So if they have the equivalency which is acceptable in a public state capacity in that particular country, so Australia to the US, for instance, public schools are probably of equal stature, then the expectation is that they go into public. If they're going into a non-English speaking country, so much of APAC, then international schools, private schools would be supported, yes. But the tuition only, not extracurricular activities.
What about intercultural training?
Yes, although I feel like there's a stigma still around that. Again, I personally feel it's something that's very important. I used to actually do the cultural training when I was back at Boeing. Personally myself, with the folks that we used to send out to the US, we used to sit down and spend a whole day with them and take them through the differences between the cultures. And it was always really surprising how surprised they were with the differences, basically, where you think there wouldn't be.
Well, between which locations? Where were you sending them from?
So at that stage it was Brisbane to Seattle.
Brisbane to Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
I would be surprised too if there were a lot of differences, but I'm sure there are. What are some of the differences that might be surprising?
Well, I mean, for the individuals going out, I felt like it was more of a kind of enhancement. But where we found the biggest differences was at that stage, we didn't have a cap on how long we would send our long-term assignments out for. And so we had folks that would go out on, so young guys that would go out to Seattle for 7 years, for instance. They'd come back, and often Brisbane's, I love Brisbane, but it's a bit like a big country town. And Boeing being aviation, a lot of the roles were based out at RAF bases, which were like an hour or two out of Brisbane. And so that was actually country. And so you'd have these people come back. These guys come back. They've been gone for 7 years. They got married. They'd had kids. And we were bringing like Seattle as basic. I don't know if that's what they call. Apologies to everyone in Seattle.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'm from the U.S. I don't know Seattlers. We're bringing Seahawks back.
Can I coin that? I can tell there's going to be some comments in a minute. Sorry. we're bringing Seattlers back to country Australia, basically. And so we actually had some quite serious cases where we struggled with retention of the individual because, like, the biggest thing that makes an assignment or a repatriation fail is the family. And so the cultural differences purely based on location, access to services, Seattle's quite cosmopolitan. This is like country Australia. It was huge differences.
Yeah. So we have some enlightened questions here about dingo relocation. I don't know where that came from, but hey, I just read the questions. Okay. I don't know. Annette Walters, what are the biggest speed bumps to employee productivity in the first 4 months, in your opinion?
I think probably, so we're talking in a relocation sense, obviously.
Yes.
I think that distraction around establishment of base is obviously the biggest speed bump. And it's not necessarily the individual feeling that unsettlement. If they have a family, as we know, it's that you kind of got one eye on your delivery of your role, making impression, embedding yourself in that host organization, but then you've got the other eye on your family or your spouse or your kids and their integration, and that can really pull on your heartstrings around that settlement. But I think the right support around that can overcome that and smooth that speed bump out a lot. I think the cultural differences as well, and I'm not just talking country culture, I'm talking organizational culture, because even if you're going from the same organization to the same organization, there will be subcultures within each of those sites and those hubs. And so I think between setting up your base logistically, bank accounts, houses, and just finding your way to the office, I think that cultural integration is probably, they're the two big ticket items or speed humps.
Love it, Keryn. That's awesome. And shout out to Annette there with the question. Annette will be on tomorrow at 4:00, so tune in then. Thank you, Annette. Keryn, this has been fantastic. This has been eye-opening, insightful. I've really enjoyed this. What's one thing maybe you want to leave our audience with today, just as a final thought?
It's a good question, Ben. I think if I could leave them all with one thing, it's approach your role with empathy. Remember why you got into the role in the first place. For me, I think there was one particular expat that has left a mark on me, particularly, which I always do a bit of a sense check. And I haven't got it with me today. It's actually at my office, but it's a physical reminder of why I do my job every day. And it was actually when I was at Ericsson, I brought an individual out, a young man who had a wife and a young son, brought them into Australia, and we were putting them, what was then back the 457 program, the big controversial working program in Australia. And one of the big hurdles with the 457 in this particular case was the son was quite sick. So he had what was likely to be a terminal illness. And so the 457 visa program, you had to make sure that the medical aspects of the individual were robust and that the family wasn't going to be a drain on the public health sector. And so the organisations, to its credit, put up support around kind of assuring the Department of Immigration that they would back this individual. The employee obviously was taking the role from a career development point of view, but also what it was going to give the family was access to the right treatment for his son in Australia, which was exclusive to Australia. And so I remember talking to him one day in the hall, again, some of the stuff that we miss now doing virtual. And he was explaining to me about every Saturday he would take his son for this treatment. And I'm not exactly sure what it was, but he described basically his son would lay face down on a table. I'm envisaging a bit like a massage table. He would lay underneath it. His son could obviously look through the table, and he would sit there on his back, lay on his back and hold an iPad up while the son was having, it was either acupuncture or something like that, treatment on him for the period. And, he used to lay there for like an hour or two trying to distract his son away from the pain of the treatment. And it just, the fact that, the son got better, he's still fine now. They have a much better life here in Australia. They had the access to the health and support that they need. And the fact that I was able to be involved in enhancing their life in that way was amazing. And the wife was so grateful that she ended up giving me this beautiful pink pashmina that I used to keep with me at the office, which is still there, that whenever I was cold, I kind of wrap it around me, and it would be a really nice reminder every day of why I did the role. So just approach your role with that. Remember why you do your role. Remember compassion for those people who are going through a really difficult time, either from a career or a personal perspective. And that's all you can do.
Keryn, that is touching. What a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that with us. It kind of got me a little misty-eyed over here. Thank you, Keryn, so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Thanks to everybody that chimed in the comments. If you want to hear more from Keryn, she will be speaking on the APAC panel, which I have the pleasure of moderating at the IAM conference, October 21st to the 23rd. Keryn, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you spending this early morning hour with us here. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Ben. Nice to see you all.
See y'all tomorrow. Take care, everybody. 4 o'clock Eastern. We'll have Annette Walters on here.